show, the big spat that you had with John was about oppression. And you said you got quite...
yeah, because I already know what you're gonna ask me, and I'm just gonna tell you this now.
Google.
Google.
Google. Google.
But it's not my job to school you on something that you should have learned in school. Women have been oppressed, and women still are oppressed because there are literal child slaves. There are black women, disabled women that experience oppression all the time, and Native American women as well. And
Native American women.
It's also Native American men as well. Aren't they oppressed?
I'm talking about women right now.
You're talking about women?
Yeah, because the question was how women have been oppressed, and I'm just gonna say it's not my job to educate you and school you on that. And if you don't know,
if I reject your presuppositions, then you do need to explain to me.
No, I'm telling you this. I'm telling you, like, it's not my job to school you. Like, you should have learned this in school. And honestly, it's a little scary that you don't know how women have been oppressed in the past, because, like, this country was, like, built for men, and these, like, laws and rules, like,
Erroneous.
It's all to, like, for men, you know? Like, it was built for men. And, like, this podcast enough is showing me that sexism is still really alive.
Can I ask you?
Oh, wow. You think this podcast is sexist?
I was posted on so many red pill incel accounts. Yes, it's giving incel a lot.
Oh, man. Okay, all the buzzwords are coming out. I don't even know where to start tackling this. Okay, so women were oppressed in history, but so were men. It's not
as much as women
now
were.
this is interesting, because if I say how were women were oppressed, you're like, well, it's self-evident, Brian. I shouldn't have to educate you. Yet you've just asked me the same question. You've just asked, how were men oppressed? Shouldn't you know?
No, because that wasn't taught in school.
So isn't that interesting? Male oppression was never taught in school, but females' oppression was. Isn't that interesting? So who's really oppressed then?
Oh my God, Brian.
If men's grievances throughout history are overlooked, who's the real one that's oppressed? Perhaps you don't even believe men are oppressed.
Don't, to be honest.
You don't?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
There's men.
Can you think of one? Give me one.
So many men literally all the time over domestic violence and domestic abuse, to the point where...
That's irrelevant, but okay.
Okay.
That happens. There's certainly violence, sure.
Yeah, there is a lot of violence against
women. But when you think of oppression, what is your definition of oppression?
I don't know really how to explain it, to be honest. But
you use the word, you ought to know how to define it if you just use the word.
Yeah, I just don't know exactly how to, like, why do you want me to explain that? That's what I'm getting.
Well, you've used a word, you ought to be able to...
Yeah, you're just putting me on the spot. You just want to embarrass me. And I'm to tell you this now, it's not going to happen, Brian. Because guess what? I'll dip right now. If
because we're having a polite conversation?
No, because I already know what this is about. We talked about this last podcast, so why do you want to bring it up again?
Well, we didn't really talk about it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to say anything else because it's not my job to school you and educate you, Brian.
Well, that's a very
And I'm not going to say anything else, and I'm going to stay quiet now.
That's a very convenient way to shut down a otherwise polite conversation. I gave you an opportunity to speak, so I think you should. You're just not going to talk? Why is this such a sensitive subject for you?
Because...
But let me ask you a question. Can we engage in this?
I don't want to, Brian.
Hold on.
I didn't even want to come
Stop
here
interrupting.
in the first place. You literally asked me to be here. I said no thanks. And you're like, come on.
Okay, well, and
what?
But why don't you want to have this conversation? Like, we can have can you stop interrupting? We can have a good faith conversation about this. Like, I don't understand why we can't just have a...
Super chatted $49.99. Nanny, you condemned domestic violence but openly admitted to assaulting your ex-boyfriend with your purse.
Like, it's totally okay to have a conversation about, I suppose, what is for you an uncomfortable subject. But I don't see why you need to shut down the conversation. Like, I've been perfectly polite to you.
Yeah, but I just don't want to answer it, Brian. Can
Well-
you respect that?
Cetero super chatted $50. Crazy. Anytime that I see females bring up women oppression on podcast, they never give examples, but instead they just say look it up or that you should already know.
Because it's true. So many, why would I have to explain it to you, Brian? Like, just be respectful. I'm not going to say anything more about it because I feel uncomfortable talking about it.
Why? But you weren't uncomfortable until I started pushing back on you.
Yeah. Because it's
10
coming
out
from a
of
place
10
of hate.
Humble super chatted
It's not.
$50.
It's not coming from a place of hate.
Okay, my super chat budget is getting a bit strained now. However, Bangs, please watch the documentary The Red Pill
Oh,
by
absolutely
Cassie
not.
J. It made a very
Echo
good
chamber.
impression on my previously negative and feminist girlfriend.
Echo chamber.
Let me ask.
So-
Let me ask you something. So, like, hold on. Let me rephrase my thoughts. A lot of people in both red pill, blue pill community could benefit from this conversation. And this is again back to the previous conversation where this is the problem. Let's have a civil discourse. Let's talk about it. And most people resort to shutting down. People are trying to understand.
He's not trying to understand. He's trying to get some views. He literally said, let's make it spicy or whatever. Like, let's get you heated because he knows that's going to get him good revenue.
And this is.
He knows that.
Well, I didn't
Here-
say
here's
that.
the
I
thing.
said
It's because you want to know why it gets so many views. It's because this is the problem that we're facing.
conversations like
So if we're able to actually have this conversation, I would also like to understand your point of view. I understand like it could come off as a bit like attacking, but a lot of people out there, a majority of people are trying to understand the situation, men and women. So if you're for women,
But no matter
Help
anything
us
I
out.
say, it's still not going to change your guys' beliefs because you guys like live by this. Like Brian has
Okay,
this
here's another thing.
podcast
Let
about
me just
it.
address that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so
Like, I
the
just don't
purpose,
think-
let me just explain something. The purpose of debate isn't necessarily to convince the person that you're debating with. It's to convince the audience.
I don't want to
Because
convince
I'm not
the
gonna
audience, bro. This
but-
is a bunch of like incels. I don't
No,
want to. They're
okay,
not
first
gonna
off, don't
listen
insult
to
my
me.
audience. They're not incels. Okay, so,
Okay.
no, don't disrespect the platform, okay? So, the purpose of a debate is not necessarily to convince the other person, it's to convince the viewer, the listener. But it's just interesting because I gave you a minute, 2 minutes to explain your position, and then when I push back a little bit, you're like, no, we're done. Like,
Yeah, because I don't have the time. And Brian, it's so late. I have like a long drive back home, and honestly, I don't want to like argue right now. To be honest, maybe if you brought it up like a little bit sooner, like I'm kind of worn out, to be honest.
well, maybe we'll have to do round 3. I will end it on this though. I think I don't expect you to respond, and you don't have to respond, but I will at least address the points that you brought up. So you said that basically the patriarchy theory, that men built this country for other men. Now, I agree with you on the first part. Men did build this country. However, men didn't build it for the benefit of other men. They built it for their families, their wives, their sons, their daughters. So I agree with you that yes, this country and all countries, in fact, have been built on the backs of men, but it's not for the benefit of other men. In fact, they've actually done studies on this. Men have an out-group bias. So men have an out-group bias for women, whereas women have an in-group bias for other women. In other words, the sisterhood. There's a sisterhood amongst women. There's not a brotherhood amongst men, at least to the same degree that there's a sisterhood amongst women. Every single thing that you see around you, the buildings you live in, the streets you drive in, the infrastructure that you rely on to survive, was all built, created, and is maintained by good, honest, hardworking men that simply want to provide for their family. It's not men wanting to oppress women. It's just men that want to work and provide for their family.
Then why couldn't women vote?
Because men were subject to military conscription.
Because women didn't want to vote either at some point. Because if they voted, then that means they have to be drafted too. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the reason, by the way, throughout the vast majority of human history, men didn't have the vote either. There was a small percentage of men who had power. The rest of the men were also oppressed alongside all of the women that were oppressed. It was like, you know, previously you had tyrants and kings and dictators. Men couldn't vote. This is like voting came around in, like, broadly speaking, in the 1900s, late 1800s, 1900s, and now obviously, well, in 1920 is when women got the right to vote. So this voting thing's very new. Democracy is very new. Most people never had the right to vote. The way men had the right to vote was because of warfare. Because men could be drafted and sent to fucking the Maginot Line in France and go in the trenches and get trench foot and get chemical gassed. And to this day, women were able to secure the vote without the corresponding responsibility. Women have a right without a responsibility. Men have a right with a responsibility. That responsibility is you have to die for your country.
Dex, you donated $50.
Thank you, man.
It's crazy when we don't go in her direction, or we put forward an argument. She closes. This is not a debate. She uses words that she doesn't know the definition. Female oppression.
Yo, Dextu, thank you for the $50 super chat. So just to wrap this whole thing up, when it comes to voting, basically men to this day are subject to military conscription. I have this here. You want to talk about systematic oppression. I don't know if you've heard of the selective service system. So I don't know if you can read this. Men 18 to 25 years old. Sorry, I need to eat. My hands are fucking shaking. So this is a draft. Ignore the bright colors. If you open this up, here, take a look at that. Here, take it. Take it. This is a draft registration form. It says 18 to 25-year-old men. Only men are subject to military conscription. That's why men got the right to vote before women.
I think
Okay.
still to this day, women don't want to be drafted,
Well, they do, and they can't.
and they can't.
They can't.
And so they're fine with that. No one, you don't see any women pushing back saying, I want to be drafted.
Exactly. Nobody wants to be drafted. I
Yeah,
don't
but
think
if
anybody
women
wants to
were
be drafted.
oppressed, they would be doing that.
No, because the
Equality,
reason
right?
why women aren't drafted or put on the front line is because women aren't seen as intimidating to the enemy, you know? Like, they're putting men because men are like stronger, biologically stronger,
Sure.
biologically, like, they don't want women there for a reason.
Sure. Well, you're not
You're not
totally wrong. Yes, men, generally speaking, are more suited for warfare.
Yeah.
Men are. It's a biological reality. Men are physically stronger than women. Now, I mean, in today's modern warfare, physical strength is still a factor, but I mean, the way we conduct warfare now is very different. So women can participate much more to some degree in combat roles. It's still, I mean, in any case, we don't need to get into the whole military thing, but
I would say
the difference is, if we're talking about equality, though, disregard, well, maybe men make better soldiers. Let's say an 18-year-old man who doesn't want to go to war, doesn't want to go get sent, take Ukraine, for example. All the women could leave the country. All the men had to stay. You could not leave the country. You cannot leave Ukraine if you were a man between the ages of 18 and like 60 or 65. While all the women in Ukraine, actually, I matched with some girls on Tinder, like when the was heavy as in Ukraine, when Kiev was getting scorched up, I was matching with chicks on Tinder and Hinge and shit. If you're a Ukrainian woman, you get to go to Stockholm, you get to go to Great Britain, you get to continue your hot girl summer. You know what the Ukrainian men were doing?
Fine.
Getting fucking massacred. So let's talk about privilege. Let's talk about privilege.
And who are the people making them go to war? Men.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I mean, the Ukrainian military brass, or the president, they don't want to be in war. That was something that Russia instigated.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, but they have to defend their country.
Okay.
We live very, very privileged lives. very privileged. If
Yeah, we
World War
do.
III, I'll tell you this, if World War III is around the corner, there's no feminists when Russia invades. There's no feminists when China invades. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. Nobody wants to go to
But
war, Ryan.
what I'm saying is that all these things that you often complain about, like when shit hits the fan, we revert to our traditional gender roles. You can't have feminism when there's a military conflict.
I would say y'all fought for equality for the longest time, and then society overcorrected. And now women have a little bit more privilege than men do. Because like you said, men are drafted first.
Now listen, women were absolutely,
draft's still a thing.
hold on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look-
They'll never
They
war.
weren't.
Look in
I
front
thought-
of you.
No, I'm just asking, like genuinely asking, because I thought like the military was so big they didn't have to do drafts anymore.
When it comes to World War III, they're gonna have to draft.
There would be a draft.
In any war, there's draft.
Also, even if the likelihood, there hasn't been a draft in a long time, however, there are still men alive today that were drafted. Many of those men got sent to Korea, got sent to Vietnam. Those men came back with catastrophic post-traumatic stress disorder. They saw horrific things. I don't know why the fuck we were in Vietnam to begin with. That's a whole nother conversation. But there are if you don't, as a man, if you don't register for the selective service, if you don't register for the draft, it's technically a felony. You can get fined $250,000. Also, if you don't register, you can't apply for federal student aid. You can't get like student loans or whatever. Also, you're barred from certain federal jobs if you don't register for the selective service as a man. There is no equivalent requirement for women to have to register, for example. So, and just to add to this thing, women were absolutely oppressed, but as were men. I don't want to make it a competition. What I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I think it's a terrible kind of shifting of history. For the longest period of time, life was so incredibly difficult for everyone. We live the most coddled, privileged, easy lives. Modernity has created, like, the comforts of modernity cannot be understated. Life was brutal even 100, 200 years ago. It was difficult. Think about the things we take for granted. Electricity, plumbing, running water, hot water, showers 200 years ago. Imagine, bro, people get grumpy if they can't have a hot shower after a couple days. Hot shower their entire life. So it's just, what I'm trying to arrive at is that life was incredibly difficult for both men and women. Men and women fundamentally were partners. Men and women cooperated throughout all human history. And I think it's a disastrous retelling of history to say men oppressed women, women were the oppressed. It teaches women to basically have contempt for and hatred for men, when in reality it was a very small percentage of men. And it's not necessarily because they were men that had all the power. So women had it hard in their own unique ways. Men have had it hard in their own unique ways. But I don't like this retelling of history that men were always the oppressor and women were the oppressed. Martin, thank you, man.
Nanny, you probably don't have to explain yourself to the kids you care for. However, in the real world, you cannot make aimless, ludicrous statements and not substantiate them. That hurts the validity of her claim. The oppressed nanny of girl. God bless you.
Yo, Martin, thank you, man.